Star Squad, we're in business! Take it, take it!
M1 Carbine.
Coming! Son, where's your squad leader at?
Sir, I don't know.
Sir, it's Sergeant. I work for a living. We have got to take that goddamn objective. We're losing the cap race. Are you with Dog Squad?
Yeah.
That squad leader's borderline an idiot. Listen, I'ma hop on command net. You keep their heads down. I'm going on the right flank. We're gonna get a friggin' airhead going. Wish me luck.
Good luck. Sir?
Hey, I ain't shaving for these videos. Can't make me. Now, there's already guaranteed a plethora of M1 Carbine content on the internet, but it is my own Library of Alexandria that I would like to make a video on it because World War II is one of my enjoyable topics. It's a comfy topic. You know, you just watch a World War II documentary while you're going to bed, and it's a treat. When I was growing up, I didn't watch cartoons. I watched the History Channel. That's probably why I am the way I am today. I'm not autistic because I don't like trains. The M1 Carbine really is a very cool weapon. You have this weird, almost quasi-intermediate cartridge, though it's not really intermediate. It's almost like a beefed up pistol round. It's a weird cartridge to me. You know, it's pissing pretty hot out of the gun. It's cooking, but it still has that reputation of not being that robust at taking down a two-legged target. And of course, yet again, we'll get into that later. Now, the gun's designer actually pulled this thing off in a feat of engineering that is unprecedented because the US Army was looking for a new firearms and they put out the specs of the M1 Carbine.
Now, to give some more context of how the M1 Carbine came about, I'm going to read you some stuff from Bruce Canfield's complete guide to the M1 Garand and M1 Carbine. The Ordnance Department solicited proposals for both civilian and government designers. This approach allowed for innovative designs to be submitted. The general characteristics required for the new weapon were as followed: weight not to exceed 5 pounds, range effective up to 300 yards, semi-automatic fire essential, full automatic desirable. To be carried by sling or some comparable device. Chambered for a cartridge of caliber 30 of the Winchester self-loading type with a case similar to that of a commercial Winchester self-loading cartridge caliber 32. Many companies submitted different designs for this request, but ultimately Winchester's design was accepted. What makes it so crazy is that Winchester developed a working prototype in just 13 days in mid-September of 1941. An enduring myth exists regarding the development and subsequent adoption of the Winchester carbine. Popular legend fostered by early 1950s Hollywood movie states that the carbine was invented by David Marshall Williams while he served the time in prison. Most legends contain a grain of truth, and this one is no exception. Mr. Williams was an ex-convict who did work on some of his designs while serving a stint in prison.
I can imagine the state prison system probably frowned on one of the inmates making a rifle. Oh, yes.
Williams was subsequently hired as a gun designer by Winchester and refined his short-stroke gas piston concept while employed by the company. As stated, Williams' gas piston was utilized in the Winchester carbine. However, unlike the M1 rifle, which was unquestionably conceived and developed by one man, John Garand, the Winchester carbine was very much a team effort by the entire Winchester organization. This is not to disparage either Mr. Williams or his talent, but he did not invent the M1 carbine contrary to popular legend. The new weapon was formally standardized as the U.S. carbine caliber 30 M1.
You know, watching this in extreme slow motion, almost like watching a ballet of firepower.
So they pull it off, which is, in terms of firearms production, like just an absolute Super Bowl upset win kind of vibe with how fast they make this gun viable. And then they proceed to quite literally crank out billions and billions. I think they got up to 6 million of these guns made during World War II. This one I want to say it's an Inland, so if I run the serial number again, I want to say it's a 44. But if I was reading from Bruce Canfield's book, is that they would make these barrels, right? Because on the barrel it's date marked 44, I want to say say 944. So someone might say September of 1944, but the date mark, like they would make the barrels and they would sit for a little bit before the gun was fully put together. This is Administrative Results News Network reporting from the high mountain country of Normandy. I'm with the 2nd Armored Division, wearing our frogskin uniform, looking drippy down to the nines. The Krauts are on the run as the US forces push into Normandy. All right, so the interesting thing about the M1 carbine during World War II is that there was a lot of different manufacturers and a lot of different subcontractors. Blowing past that, because one could really get lost in the details, there were also different iterations and upgrades made to the M1 carbine throughout the lifespan of World War II, eventually getting to the M2 carbine, all that different jazz. Mainly this is just an M1 carbine that's not full auto like the M2 carbine, but it does share certain features that say an M2 carbine would have. Now, for most of the war, the M1 carbines did not have a bayonet lug, and this is a later feature. I believe these are referred to as a T4 by collectors, but it's not a historical designation. Now, most of the M1 carbines used during World War II would have this bayonet lug added after and going into Korea and forward on. So you could probably find it and swap it out, but it's on here right now. Probably wouldn't be historically accurate. If I'm in 1944 France with the 2nd Armored, it was probably a much later thing in the war, but for my reenactors that want to call me a farb, understandable. Next thing is the iron sights back here. So the iron sights on this are going to be of the more advanced variety. When they even got to the more advanced with the dials and everything, there was 2 kinds. The M1 carbine was designed for like a PDW for your Echelon troops. You know, if you're not expecting a lot of frontline combat, you may not worry about that windage and elevation dial for the rear peep sight, so it could just be wasted on you. Or if you're a guy who's really into taking good accurate shots and has better eyesight than me, then that rear windage and elevation could be gangbusters. Now, another thing that would change throughout the war would be the stock of wood itself. The wood stock of wood. Another thing that would change throughout the war would be the wood stock itself, with different cuts, different degrees of measurement of cuts of, say, the sight groove on top. When I first showed this to my cameraman who's holding the camera, he's like, "Oh, cool. Is that like a thumb groove?" And I was like, "Look down the sights, bozo." And then a different thing would be the size of the cut right here, where you see the op rod and the charging handle and all that. It would be either a higher cut or a lower cut, depending on the year and the make. So things that are just a little bit different. Man, does this frogskin camo look cool. You know where I got it from? This video sponsor, Americana Pipe Dream Apparel, fantastic young Zoomers doing milsurp space in the milsurp arena. Not only do they have milsurp clothing, but they have night vision knives, manuals, e-bikes, a bunch of really cool stuff to help fill out that drip. Now, I don't know if they still got the frog skin. It's been a while since I've had this, and I've had it for a very long time, but fear not, if you're on the market for something cool, I guarantee you they got it, so go check them out. We also have to give a big thank you to Optics Plant, the optics sponsor of the channel, which is a weird plug for a video that involves M1 carbine with no optics whatsoever, but nonetheless, they're the optic sponsor. Gotta give them a thank you. And of course, Badlands Munitions usually supplies the ammo for these videos, but they don't have any 30 cal carbines unless you probably ask them really nicely, but nonetheless, they are the ammo sponsor of the channel. Got to give them a massive thank you for that. Local Arizona company. Appreciate those guys a bunch. All right, Lieutenant Dan, listen up. Just got word from High Command, AKA our commander named Butt Sniffer. Enemy artillery's been jacking up our boys on the point, so it's gonna be our job to go take them out. So follow me. Oh, one thing. I'm not calling you sir. You know, I could really see the M1 carbine not getting the job done if your enemy is on a lot of methamphetamines, potentially like the Japanese or Germans could have been. I could see that. You know, we're chilling out right now, but we don't have an adrenaline rush. We're not in this really violent state of mind, and none of us are on meth that you know of. Anyway, what I want to do, demonstrate real quick, 1911 versus M1 carbine. We have a target set up, camera rolling, about 50 yards from here. We'll go 1911 first, but should we do it historically accurate and shoot it one-handed? Oh no, the Jerry's broke through. All right, 7 rounds. I can see some daylight on that target. That 45's God's caliber. Let's go check the results. The World War II result.
Get ready to move on the left flank. Take their left flank.
Hold on, make sure they're down. What do we got, Cap? I fired 8 rounds with the carbine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, my shooting with the carbine wasn't exceptional, but I was going for the head. I hit him in the neck. With the 1911, from that distance, one-handed, got 3 hits. borderline got an A-zone with the 1911. With the M1 Carbine, got 3 A-zone. All of them were on paper, and it was very easy to shoot and get a sight picture. So millions of M1 carbines start getting made. The idea behind them is a weapon for rear echelon troops, a personal defense weapon, one might say, which is an odd tale that's kind of like times a flat circle, because if we fast forward in years, well, hold on, let's set the stage in the context. Germany's doing lightning warfare, they're blitzkrieging, breaking through lines, getting behind enemy lines, and say a enemy combat infantry platoon may come across some rear echelon troops that are more in the logistical variety. Those cats may all be armed with 1911s and may stand no chance. They're already on a really bad foot because these guys have, in the OODA loop of violence, are already attacking them in the violent initiative. Now they have to react with 1911s. Well, what if they had M1 carbines? Could the accumulative nature of rear echelon troops being armed with an M1 carbine help slow down, an advancing German army? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't hurt. Okay, so the thought process of this PDW is we have a risk of an enemy military getting behind our lines, jacking up their rear echelon guys. We got to give these jokers a chance. Fast forward to the Cold War, where they're worried about Russians parajumping behind them and messing up the rear echelon troops, and so they're designing a lightweight PDW. So then we get to the P90 and the MP7, and then it's kind of like history is repeating itself again in that sense. Thank you, European conflicts, for our weapons designs. So, of course, with the PDW, it's typically considered a smaller caliber, a little bit more effective than, say, a pistol, nice, lightweight, compact. Some might be looking at this and thinking, compared to a P90 or an MP7, this thing looks like a canoe. But if you compare this thing to a M1 Garand, a BAR, or hell, a 1917, this thing is like a toy. It's like 5 pounds, while all the other rifles are absolute beefcakes. Hell, even the Thompsons are thickums. It's ridiculous. This thing legitimately feels incredibly light, and it is wieldy compared to the firearms of the day. I often wish they even made this gun a little bit shorter, which was like modifications that came later. Like, guys still would use M1 carbines into Vietnam, and they would chop them down, or maybe even M2 carbines because those are fully automatic, and chop the barrels down and have a really small weapon that's just violent and nasty. I don't know, I kind of like that stuff. Anyway, so the M1 carbine would go on, and it's serving in World War II in both theaters with the American military, showing up in the Pacific and showing up in the European theater, of course. Typically, and that is the case, I will say, with MP7s, P90s in modern days, they were designed for rear echelon logistical supply line type troops, but then high-speed tip of the spear dudes come across it and they're like, dang, this MP7 is pretty sick. Let's take it on our DevGru Navy SEAL raids. And I go back to World War II, and those GIs probably seeing the M1 carbine thinking like, dang, this gun's pretty lightweight and wieldy. Let's take it to the front line and use it. Now, of course, I would say a lot of times the M1 carbine, and it kind of does fit that niche of guns that I think about for this role, but senior enlisted NCOs or the officer type of role where your job necessarily isn't to be a ground pounding rifleman. Your job is to lead those guys. So you're not necessarily glued to your iron sights as much as your rifleman would be. A lighter weight gun that is comfy to carry around starts to look more appealing. So you start to see a lot of photos of officers running around with M1 carbines, and I think of shows like Band of Brothers. First Sergeant Lipton, who become a lieutenant, he's always running around with an M1 carbine, and then he would have an M1 Garand though, so it kind of varied. He had an M1 carbine when he invaded in Normandy, the paratrooper version, I believe. At Breakcourt Manor, he was smoking Germans. And then of course, like Sledgehammer from the Pacific, who's a mortarman, where he's not necessarily as expected to be doing rifleman stuff, even though he's a Marine, so every Marine's a rifleman, but you know what I mean. So he's expected to be running the Angry 2 mortar. He has an M1 carbine. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit comfier, and a little bit more enjoyable to carry. Now, there was this thing I was coming across, mixed reports from veterans and historical accounts where, these guys that carry the M1 carbine, some guys loved it, some guys hated it. Guys loved it for the obvious reasons, lightweight, carried a bunch of ammo, and then of course the obvious reasons for guys not liking it is that it didn't have no knockdown power or wasn't dropping guys as easy as the M1 Garand would, which makes sense if we think about it. A 30-06 round versus a 30 caliber carbine round, there is a massive weight differential too, and a lot of velocity difference. And I can see that.
I think that.
Personally, if I was in World War II, I would probably still opt for an M1 Garand, but running around with an M1 carbine, having this much ammo on me, and as lightweight as the gun is, it really starts to feel very enjoyable in that sense. But even when I play Hell Let Loose, I usually wish I had an M1 Garand if I'm running a carbine. Say if I'm like a recon class spotter, which they have to use the M1 carbine. It makes me Jones for an M1 Garand in that sense. The M1 Garand in that game is just so goated. Anyway, okay. So I often wonder too, with that argument argument of those vets from that time, where if maybe like one vet was just a better shot, he had his M1 Carbine and he smokes a guy in the heart or the head, and he's like, dang, this thing's awesome. I still got like 14 more rounds after smoking that one Jerry or that one Japanese fella. Whereas the guys with the M1 Garands, like they could probably hit him in the stomach and still fold anybody, you know? Or maybe the guys with like the M1 Carbines that suck at shooting, they're like peppering some dude and he's just not dying yet. And he's like, this thing sucks, I hate it. I don't know. You know, it's all theory. So as you notice, and I mentioned it, we do have a M1 Carbine pouch on the buttstock right here. Probably couldn't get away with this on the paratrooper variant, but it kind of does slide around a little bit. Once you do cinch it down towards the rear, usually good to go. Probably gonna loosen up once you start pulling mags out, but it's nice to have more mags on the gun, say if you don't have as much web gear on, and you're going around as an officer with your binos, just like glass and stuff, and you got your carbine with you and you're nice and comfy because you haven't slept for like 3 days.
Every Marine out of those racks and on my deck!
We do have a oiling kind of little cleaning kit back here in the stock, and it's retained by the sling, which I think is pretty fun. It's a fun little attention to detail. You don't have any compartment back here like on the M1 Garand. Your functions for the firearm, you have your mag release with the M and the underline marked right there. Pull it out, you got your 15 round mag, YouTube compliant. Thank you, M1 Carbine, and not thank you to YouTube. Why do you do this to me? We have our safety. Right now she's on safe. Pull the trigger, nothing happens. Take it off safe. There you go. Pretty comfy trigger pull. I do have a bayonet here, and this probably wouldn't be historically accurate for the 2nd Armored Division in Normandy, but yet again, we're not playing it 100% by the book. Take your bayonet, and then we thread her on, and we got a nice little poker. Bayonets, you know, in the time World War II, even getting into World War II, one might think, you know, bayonet could be obsolete by then. Probably not if you got to take a bunch of prisoners, you know, very deterrent. If your German prisoners start acting up, give them a little, hey, oh, knock that off, Fritz. Now, I want to say these bayonets themselves were modified from the M3 bayonet, and then I believe the new designator with these modified carbine bayonets, they'd be like the M4 bayonet. US military really loves that M designator. This one does have the bombshell mark on it. It is called the M4 bayonet. Man, I'm so good. And it does actually on the bayonet have the M4 marking on it, and it says Utica. Disassembly of the gun is pretty simple, where all you have to do, take this screw out up here, depress it, the band, push it forward, and the gun pretty much comes apart for more advanced cleaning. It doesn't have anything to do with this screw back here. Take this part, stock comes apart, pretty simple. General Motors, GM made this. Now the M1 Carbine, of course, made its debut in World War II, but the gun was pretty popular and would remain pretty popular for years after the war, being used in Korea and into Vietnam and even into civilian firearms ownership. There's a famous picture, I believe, of Malcolm X having an M1 Carbine after getting death threats or people coming to his house. One or the other, I'm a little hazy on that history, but it shows to say that the M1 still had a lot of legs after. Getting into Korea, I would say a lot of those guns probably were the M2 Carbine variant, the full auto variant, which I do like the idea of that, given this gun, the lightweight nature of it, the low recoil of it, and if you're getting into these really close engagements in some of those conflicts, say, you know, in Korea where there's massive wave attacks of enemy combatants, or say in the jungles of Vietnam where your distances get so compacted due to your sight line restrictions, and an M1 Carbine or an M2 Carbine cut down could prove useful. There's famous photos of like the Tet Offensive where Marines have an M14, an M16, an M1 Carbine, or an M2 Carbine all in the same photo. Wild to think about. This is a cross-pollination of weapons showing up in conflicts throughout the world. I believe that the US military did have a bunch of M1 Carbines in stock post-World War II, and then in the 60s they released them, and there was a massive surge where guys could go and buy them for pretty cheap. Nowadays, the market on these things probably a little bit more upcharged for what they are considered, but if the more collectible, then the more sought after kind of thing. So there were, of course, a number of variants I've talked about. The variant with the big old infrared scope on it, if you ever played Battlefield 5, you'll know what I'm talking about, with the massive like infrared scope on that thing. Really interesting to think of that technology existing back in World War II. It definitely does look like a massive laser beam on your gun. It's ridiculous, but it's kind of fun with the variants. But ultimately, gentlemen, I will say that the M1 Carbine is a very cool piece of firearms history from a conflict that shaped the world that we live in today. I think history is a beautiful subject. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you on the flip.